Still being explored, maybe.
Yes, being explored. And so if you brought more than what was asked for, it was met with, why did you bring me this? I didn't ask for that. So that being very literal kind of flows across to all these other relationships and can really affect that. It's
Because
interesting.
in context, like typically soup is the sick person food. It's a bland food. And
Yes,
so usually
yes,
soup and salad
yes. I
would go
understand
together.
why she would think that soup would have been at this point, I understand why she thought soup would have been a natural thing I would have brought her. Um, but for my very literal brain, I only brought what was asked for. So that was an interesting instance where I could definitely see it being misunderstood and not just okay. And I was so confused at that moment. Looking back on it, we've had a lot of really good times and whatnot. So it one of the things I've had to process after having a diagnosis is the idea of people not being literal. And so there's been instances I've had to process of being gullible. Um, we know between me and my husband that I am not the person to sit in a sales pitch alone. They will sell me every time because I believe them every single time. I'm so gullible. I have learned and have had to teach myself to be a bit more skeptical, but that is an area where I kind of feel like, why is it that I am told that I'm the one with the disorder when I'm telling the truth and being honest, and yet on the neurotypical side, being honest isn't normal. Like, to be honest is to leave yourself vulnerable. And so therefore lying is actually normalized, or white lying, or whatever you want to call it. But that to me, like, I'm frustrated at the idea that I'm being told that I have a disorder because I'm too honest, you know?
So maybe part of that gullible, you said gullible and maybe naivety. So in sales presentations, that might be an issue. Sometimes women on the spectrum can find themselves in trouble in dating relationships, especially if they don't know.
Mhm.
They haven't identified that part of their identity. How was dating like for you?
I'm trying to think about instances with that. I did not have many boyfriends, so I don't know that I experienced it there as opposed to just being very trusting around males in general through up until college. Um, I have read studies where the MRIs show brains when they are socializing. And you have a neurotypical female brain, a certain part of their brain lights up. But with an autistic female, a different part of their brain lights up. That same part that an autistic female, where it lights up in the brain, is where a neurotypical male socializing will light up. And then an autistic male is a completely different area. So I'm hypothesizing that part of the reason why females are not identified as quickly is because they still have neurotypical patterns, but they have more of a male neurotypical pattern. So I grew up hanging out with a lot of boys. I think that's part of why I was an athlete, but I got along with boys. I had a lot of best friends that were boys. I also had best friends that were girls too. But as I'm finding that I'm older, they're also getting late diagnosed with various things. So it kind of still makes sense. And I was very trusting of boys, having grown up with them. And then college hit. And I think that naivete um, really bit me in college because I was actually sexually assaulted twice. And just in situations where looking at it, it was definitely taken advantage of. So it wasn't from a person I was actually dating. It was just a guy in the group of guys that was always around. Two different individuals about a year apart from each other.
I was just doing an interview with someone when we were talking about safety skills for kids and teens on the spectrum. And the person was saying, and I agree, the research certainly shows us that sometimes someone on the spectrum, just even a friend of a friend is enough familiarity to kind of put your guard down. That acquaintances, sometimes it's hard to know what's an acquaintance and a friend and how vulnerable or open am I with this person. Because in the neurotypical world, there's certainly stronger circles, like that's an acquaintance, that's a stranger, that's a close friend, that's their friend, but not my friend. But sometimes that gets blurred, especially for girls on the spectrum, because you're still female. And so that more tendency to want to be friendly or social might open you up to vulnerable places, especially when you don't know that about yourself.
Yeah, and I would say the first time around, I was actually drugged. The police believed that it was Liquid X that I was drugged with, and we still have no idea who that person is. All I know and can speculate is that it's the same person that had assaulted a few other females in that wider group. Like you said, there's, you have your close friends and your semi close friends, and then it keeps going out. There's a very big group, but I was definitely very trusting of the very big group. And that kind of shattered my world a little bit. And then the year later, it was someone that I knew, still not in the close circle, but within a little bit broader circle. And but I was way too trusting. To be transparent, it was at a party. I had gotten really tired, and so I had gone to sleep in one of the beds there. That is something that just we did as college students. Like, it doesn't mean anything. You just go to sleep, right? And then you wake up and go home at some point when all your friends are going home. So I did. And he came in and I told him no, because I was actually I was semi-dating a friend of his already. So I was like, no, I'm not doing this. So he leaves, but then he came back, like, I don't even know how long it was. He came back later and then would not take no for an answer. And so I kind of froze and I laid there and I cried. I mean, he didn't even fully undress me and I left. And then I didn't speak about it for years. I was very vocal about sexual assault, and after that first one, the second one, even though I was still vocal about sexual assault and kind of coaching other girls that had gone through it, I still did not tell anybody about that one. It took me, I want to say, like 4 years maybe before I told my closest friend about it. And unfortunately, my husband knows who he is, so he's the one that brought it up, because that was not the story he was told. He was told that I willingly did. And as soon as he brought it up, I hung up. I basically was like, you have no idea what you're talking about, and hung up on him. And so it really showed how much that one impacted me, of like, I really trusted way too easily in that situation. And yeah, also I didn't have the protection there either, that I needed in a support system.
Yeah. And so, what about that second one felt more shame for you? Because both were equal assault. They were equal, even according to the law, right? But what made that second one feel so much more shameful from your perspective?
I think part of it is that I was awake and aware. With the first one, that being drugged, I have vague memory of, I could tell someone was in the room and they were causing me pain, but I didn't know what was happening. And then I kind of blacked out again. And the next thing I know, my roommate is in there, like, and because I'm like freaking out, because I was bleeding. I was a virgin for that first one. And then the second time, I think because I was awake and aware of what was going on, even though I was in a frozen place, basically in a survival method, I think that there was a lot of guilt and shame over just freezing and allowing it to happen rather than fighting back, or like really there was no option to run. So there was a lot of trauma surrounding that of I could not run. He was much, much bigger than I was. But I also didn't fight, and now being a therapist and really studying somatic therapies for the last several years, especially surrounding trauma, I understand that that's not the wiring for everybody to fight. And so I've been able to kind of let that go, that my wiring is to freeze. I'm not even necessarily a runner. So, I hear something go bump in the night, I'm frozen. Or I'm going, where can I go hunker down and hide until the threat has passed?
Yeah.
So that's my wiring. And for my husband's the fighter. He's passed that down to two of our kids. They are fighters. If you threaten them, they're bum rushing you, but I'm a freezer, and my oldest daughter, she's going to freeze too. So that has helped me overcome that shame of you didn't do anything. So you must have wanted it. You must have, all those things of like, what could I have done differently, and not to be in that place, and just understanding that, my wiring is different. I was too trusting. That put me there. And I'm also a freezer under threat. So knowing that now, I can let go.
And this is such an important topic. I want to call this out, and I have no problems calling people's names out. So this is a huge issue. When the studies came out for the Southern Baptist Convention and the IBLP, Bill Gothard, Jim Bob Duggar, they strongly believe that if a woman doesn't cry out, fight back, or yell rape, that she is equally complicit in the act. And neuroscience shows us now that we've only been talking about fight or flight, but there is fawn and freeze.
Absolutely.
And so that is extremely important to know why so many women can't or don't fight back. In some situations, it might be a physical threat to them because in general, most men are stronger than women. Yeah. And then the second thing, there is a legitimate freeze and fawn response that, I had this one incident, it was nothing compared to yours, but like my personality, I'm a fighter. I'm very sassy and I will fight back. But we were in New Orleans and we were walking along the streets of New Orleans, and my husband's a very passive person. He is not a fighter. He is conflict avoidant. Yeah. And we were walking on the streets of New Orleans, and I hear this drunk guy, and I think he's talking about me, but I'm not sure. He's like 20 something and I'm 40 something. And he's talking about my chest. And I was like, I was processing, is he talking about me? Because he's crossing the street and heading in my direction. And I was like, I was still thinking like, I'm old enough to be his mother. It's like, that's what I'm thinking in my head. And he gets right up on me and starts to grab me. And I totally froze and shut down. While my nature would be normally like, get away from me. That would be my normal. And Dan's normal nature, which is more conflict. I call it the swoop. I mean, like in seconds, he had pushed me aside behind him like a mother hen and had chest bumped him and pushed this person away, which that situation is neither one of our temperaments. And then I was so upset the whole time. I was like, what was wrong with you, Stephanie? Like, you're a fighter. You was a punk. You weren't even in danger. But I was just so shocked by it was happening and processing, what is he doing? And then Dan just went into his protective mode. I was like, wow, under duress, Dan will kind of pop up there. So some of it can be our temperament, but even in that moment when it is a traumatizing situation, sometimes your brain works against you. It is kind of running like, what is the most survival mechanism right now? And right now, the biggest survival mechanism, kind of like a possum, might be to freeze or to do nothing and let the threat or predator pass. And then that is so shame-inducing for many people. So I just think if anyone has ever had that happen, I just want to stop and I want to shout out this awful theology and awful legalism that shames victim blames victims because of the clothes they were wearing. Maybe
Yes.
they were intoxicated. Maybe they shouldn't have been at that club, because it totally takes all of the responsibility off of
Exactly.
the person who actually did the assaulting.
Exactly. Yep.
That is not okay. It is not
Exactly.
okay.
And my full
So,
belief is that whatever neuroscience is going to come up and out with in their research, it is the way that God has designed it. So it's just going to prove over and over that neuroscience is going to prove that the way God designed us is good, and that's just the way it is. So if there is a freeze and a fight, and there is a fawn and a flee, then all of those things are valid responses, and He
right.
designed us that way.
Absolutely. And sometimes we're not in control of when the fight, flight, freeze fawn comes. And again, based on our temperament and wiring, it might be different in different situations.
Mm-hmm.
Comes out. And I think that's so important, because I was watching it. I got so dysregulated. I was so upset because this sermon popped up on my feed, probably because I talk about these things. And it was a preacher saying something like, young women, you should never wear pants, because if you do, and if I'm sitting on the jury and you come up before me for a rape case, I'm not going to believe you. And I was so like dysregulated for 15 minutes. I was like, I can't believe that was said from a church pulpit. I just cannot believe this still exists in 2024. But there's still all
Wow.
these antiquated, and it's taking a scripture verse out of context. There is a
Oh yeah.
scripture in the Old Testament that says something about rape and calling out and reporting that. But again, this was an ancient culture, because if you were married to someone, I mean, they verified your virginity before you got married, right? I mean, we don't do that anymore. But so there was the kind of this law about, making sure it was a real assault and not sexual promiscuity. So it's taking that little thing, I think it's maybe in Leviticus, but it's somewhere in the Old Testament, that if you do not cry for help, then it wasn't really. I was like, wow, that is not the context. I mean, I sometimes say, like, hey, you're supposed to be neurotypical and read things in context. You are taking that
Mhm.
out of context,
Yes.
your own theology or legalism. And it's just, I thank you so much for sharing that. It's really vulnerable to talk about sexual assault, but I knew that little bit about your story and wanted to ask, because it's a problem for women in general who are not believed, but then secondly, for neurodivergent women, whether there's gullible or naivety or trusting or not reading the room for some of the social cues, that doesn't make that person responsible for the assault. It just makes them more vulnerable
Yeah,
to assault.
absolutely. Yes, exactly. And hopefully with that awareness that there is that possibility, we can help more people, more women stay safe and understand themselves that maybe they need a little more help judging the safety. You know, I have learned now to go back to my husband, even if we go back to like the marketing, right? I go back to him and ask him to process this with me so that I've got another set of eyes. Um, Even just people in general, there's people that I have told him that I've started to maybe open up to, and he might be like, I don't know that we should go there with them, and maybe we need to set some boundaries. And really it goes both ways. Like there's some people that I kind of get, okay, I'm not seeing a good healthy boundary here. So let's set that there. But he does that for me too. And I think if we know that there's that weakness of being too trusting and whatnot, then you can ask for help from someone else that has a different perspective and can be reading the room a little bit differently and whatnot, and kind of taking stock on, do we want to invest our time and our energy in this sort of relationship or this sort of group of people? Yeah.
You're bringing up another really important thing that I would love for neurospicy couples to really understand. You and Brandon sound like you work a little bit more on a partnership. And so with some of my couples, when specifically say the man is diagnosed 40, 50, 60 years old, there's still not the understanding of, well, maybe some things I'm not reading social cues in context. So instead of being upset or offended that
Mhm.
my spouse is trying to bring that to my attention, lean into, well, thank goodness I have a spouse who is gifted in that area. And
Yes.
instead of being offended that I'm not reading the room, or this person's telling me, hey, remember, don't talk about so and so's divorce in front of so and so, that would be very, hurtful. Social prompting, instead of seeing that as controlling and offensive, lean into each other's strengths. I know this about myself. I am vulnerable, or I might overshare. So I'm going to ask my husband about that. We're going to talk about that. And I'm going to, because I trust him, I'm going to lean on some of his strengths. But it sounds like in a healthy relationship, he also allows you to influence him. It's the ability to influence each other and lean into each other's strengths versus being offended by that.
Absolutely. And that goes to even more so than just relationships. He was actually just talking about how he will bring something, especially when it has to do with computers and software type work, to me. And he may have been already looking at it for hours and hours and hours. And then he'll bring it to me, and I'll take off, and within an hour or two, I've like already passed him, and what I'm doing with it. And he said that, a lot of people get really jealous when other people are like that. So then they kind of hoard that, or they don't share it. And he does the opposite. He's like, I'm already doing something with it, but if I give this to her, then she's going to take it and run with it. Some of this is what we call like isn't it in Gottman that they call it accepting influence, I believe, is what
Yep.
he's told me. So accepting influence from your partner is huge when you are neurodiverse, and not to be threatened by what their strengths are. So one of the things that I have even backed up on since realizing that I'm on the spectrum is I don't need to be the public speaker. For years, because he's very gifted in speaking and doing public speaking and workshops and whatnot. I mean, he sits and talks with people literally all day, every day. And having been a licensed massage therapist, I don't have to talk to people necessarily. I do. I love having those relationships, but I don't have the same level of energy that he does and that he brings to a room. He's one of those people where we walk into a room and everybody knows who we are very quickly and recognize us. And I've always been a little bit jealous of him because I feel like I'm recognized because I'm his wife, and as opposed to I'm recognized as my own person. So I always felt like, well, I've got to learn to be a public speaker and bring the same amount of energy that he does. And now learning, you know what, my autism means that I don't have the same social battery that he does, and that's okay. But he has an enormous social battery, and he can be the life of the party if he wants to. So let's let him have that as a strength, and he can be more of the face of things. I still can learn these skills. It's not that they're not invaluable, but I don't have to do the majority lifting of that public face that for our business and for all the various projects that we're doing. So I'm now allowing him to be the strength in that. And yet I'm also getting more opportunities now to speak than I ever have. And it's like, I let go of that. And now I'm like getting that stage time. It's interesting. But it's something where I'm learning from him all the time. And now I finally have the humility to say that it's not a constant, and it's not going to be something that I can do day in and day out like he could. And that's okay.
Absolutely. So that is one of the big things in neurodiverse couples is to lean into each other's strengths, and I remember one time Dan was really frustrated with me because navigating and maps, and like he can get anywhere in Atlanta anytime. He knows how to do it. I mean, it's
That's
like
me.
there's a permanent map in his brain, and he keeps up with construction. Like he knows, and I am navigationally challenged. Like
Oh, that is so our dynamic. I'm
I
the map
cannot do
person.
anything without it. And he would be like, for someone so smart, why can you not do this? And I would say, wait a minute. For someone so smart, why can't you read a room? And I was like, ah, touche. I was like, okay,
Right.
see, so you're blessed to have me in the social context, and I'm
Yeah,
blessed to have you navigate. So if we look
absolutely.
at it that way, I don't need to learn that skill. Stop getting frustrated with me about that. And let me, we prompt each other. And I think that's what so many neurodiverse couples, there's a higher divorce rate, sadly, because there's so long before there's diagnosis, but then secondly, there's a lot of hurt and a lot of trauma and a lot of offense that
Yeah.
is built up,
Yeah.
usually by the time of diagnosis. And so I really thank you for being vulnerable, being transparent about your journey. We'll have to get Brandon on here.
Yes.
We can do a couple's time to talk about this kind of extra layer of him being ADHD and you being on the spectrum, possibly ADHD. While there's similarities in some in the neurodivergence, I imagine there has to be with the ADHD profile and a more structured profile. There's got to be some differences there that can be challenges.
Oh yes. How many shows do you want?
Right. We could
Like,
do like a series,
yes, yes.
Well, as we're kind of closing today, what is a takeaway point or what's something you want to drive home or something I didn't ask you that you want to make sure is said before we wrap it up?
I think just that if there's anyone that's wondering if they're on the spectrum or just neurodiverse in general, keep doing your research and reach out to a neuroaffirming psychologist that can help you with that diagnosis process. I know that there is a lot of fear and shame around the prospect of the diagnosis. I even told my husband when he asked me to consider being evaluated. I said, "But you're the one with the cool one. Like ADHD is the cool
It is now.
neurodiversity right now. Autism is not understood. If I go tell someone that I'm autistic, they're going to look at me and be like, no, you're not. Because from the outside, it's not believable. But your inner experience and the way that you view the world and process the world is valid. And if if you kind of suspect that, keep exploring and keep finding those people that can help normalize what has gone on with you.
Thank you. That's a great message to end with. We got to reduce the shame.
Mhm.
So, listeners, as I always like to remind you, there is hope for your future, and you don't have to be alone on this journey.